What if a single cup of coffee, a gesture worth less than $4, could shatter your world? For Clara Evans, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and despair, it was just another act of kindness she couldn't afford. The recipient was a frail old man, forgotten by the world, unable to pay his small bill. But this man wasn't forgotten. He was hiding a secret powerful enough to build empires and tear families apart. He wasn't looking for charity, he was looking for a successor. Clara's small act of compassion didn't just buy a stranger's coffee. It unknowingly entered her into a dangerous test, unleashing a storm of greed and betrayal that would threaten everything she held dear. This is the story of how a $3.75 act of kindness made a waitress an heiress, and an enemy to one of the most powerful families in the country. The hiss of the espresso machine was the soundtrack to Clara Evans's life. It was a constant, percussive reminder of the relentless rhythm of her days. Steam, pour, serve, repeat. The scent of burnt coffee beans and artificial vanilla syrup clung to her clothes and hair, a perfume she couldn't wash away. At 24, Clara felt significantly older. Her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, once so vibrant, had faded to the color of the dishwater she plunged her hands into 100 times a day. The cafe, the daily grind, was a purgatory of sticky tables and lukewarm coffee on the corner of Oak Street, a part of the city that was slowly being forgotten. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, was a man whose smiles were as rare as a winning lottery ticket. He watched the cash register with the intensity of a hawk, believing every employee was just a moment away from dipping into the till. Clara's exhaustion wasn't just from the long hours. It was a deeper, soul-crushing weariness that came from the stack of unpaid bills on her small kitchen table and the ever-present fear that coiled in her stomach. Her younger sister, Lily, was the sun in her sky and the reason for her fight. Lily, only 16, was born with a congenital heart defect, a cruel lottery of genetics that required a mountain of medications, and the looming specter of a high-risk surgery they couldn't possibly afford. Every dollar Clara earned from tips, carefully folded and placed in a jar labeled Lily's Heart, felt like a single drop of water against a raging fire. On a bleak Tuesday afternoon, the rain outside matching the mood inside, the bell above the door chimed. An old man shuffled in, stooped and frail, leaning heavily on a worn wooden cane. He wore a threadbare tweed coat, its collar frayed, and trousers that had seen better decades. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a flicker of sharp intelligence that seemed out of place with his destitute appearance. He sat at a small table in the corner, the one that wobbled and nursed a single black coffee for over an hour, watching the world go by. Clara checked on him a few times. He was polite but quiet, offering only a small, sad smile. When he finally shuffled to the counter to pay, he fumbled through his pockets, a look of rising panic on his face. I seem to have misplaced my wallet, he mumbled, his voice raspy with age and embarrassment. His cheeks flushed a deep crimson. I am so sorry. I can come back later. Mr. Henderson, who had been observing from behind the counter, scoffed audibly. Right. Come back later. That's what they all say. Just wash dishes for an hour, old-timer. That should cover your $3.75. Clara's heart clenched. She saw the deep humiliation in the old man's eyes. She saw her own grandfather in them, a proud man reduced to moments of forgetfulness in his final years. She pictured Lily, her brave, beautiful sister, and the kindness she deserved from the world, a kindness that was so often in short supply. Before she could think it through, she stepped forward, pulling her own small wallet from her apron. Inside was a $10 bill and a few ones, her grocery money for the next 3 days. It's okay, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice firm, avoiding her manager's glare. She turned to the old man, offering him a warm, genuine smile. Don't you worry about it. It's on me today. Everyone has one of those days. She took out 4 $1 bills and put them in the register. The old man looked at her, his clear blue eyes searching her face. The panic was gone, replaced by a profound, quiet intensity. He seemed to see past the tired uniform and the faint smell of coffee, looking at something deeper within her. Thank you, young lady, he said. his voice surprisingly steady. "You are very kind. What is your name?" "Clara. Clara Evans." "Clara," he repeated as if committing the name to memory. People don't often look twice at an old man like me. They see the worn coat, not the person inside it. "You did. Thank you." He didn't say another word. He simply nodded, turned, and walked out of the cafe, the bell chiming his departure. "What do you think you're running here, Evans? A charity?" Mr. Henderson snarled the moment the door closed. "That comes out of your tips, you know." "It was already my money," Clara said quietly, her small act of defiance making her hands tremble. "Don't let it happen again," he warned, his eyes like chips of flint. Clara just nodded, returning to wiping down tables. She felt the loss of those $4 keenly. It meant another night of ramen noodles and worrying if the electricity would stay on. But as she cleaned the wobbly table where the old man had sat, she felt a flicker of something else too. In a life that felt increasingly transactional and cold, she had chosen for a moment to be warm. She didn't know it, but that single simple choice had set in motion a chain of events that would alter the very fabric of her existence. The old man, Arthur Kensington, had not misplaced his wallet, and his visit to the daily grind was anything but random. The test had begun. For the next 2 weeks, life for Clara returned to its grueling normalcy, the memory of the old man fading into the background of her daily anxieties. The bill for Lily's latest medication arrived, a figure so high it made Clara feel dizzy. She took on an extra shift, cleaning the cafe after closing, the acrid smell of bleach replacing the scent of coffee as she scrubbed floors on her hands and knees until 1 a.m. The tips jar for Lily's heart filled with agonizing slowness. She didn't notice the sleek black sedan that was often parked across the street during her shifts. She didn't notice the man inside, always dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, who would occasionally watch her through the cafe window. His name was David Chen, and he was the lead attorney and most trusted confidant of Arthur Kensington. Arthur Kensington was not a forgetful, destitute old man. He was the founder and CEO of Kensington Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and finance. He was a titan of industry, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms and on stock market floors. He was also a man in mourning. His beloved wife of 55 years, Eleanor, had passed away 6 months prior, leaving a void in his life that no amount of wealth could fill. His grief had been compounded by a bitter disappointment in his own family. His 2 grandchildren, Marcus and Isabella, were the sole heirs to his vast fortune. Marcus, a ruthless executive in the company, saw Kensington Holdings not as a legacy, but as a cash machine. He was all cold calculation and ambition, with none of his grandfather's integrity. Isabella lived a vapid life of social media influence and extravagant parties, viewing the family fortune as her birthright, a means to fund an endless parade of designer clothes and luxury travel. They visited their grandfather out of obligation, their condolences feeling hollow, their eyes already calculating their inheritance. Arthur saw in them the corrosion of wealth. He had built his empire from the ground up, with Eleanor by his side on principles of hard work, humility, and compassion. He saw none of that in the generation poised to take over. He couldn't bear the thought of his life's work, in Eleanor's memory, being squandered by their greed and entitlement. So he devised a plan, a quiet, desperate search. He started frequenting humble places, diners, libraries, bus stations, dressed in his old gardening clothes, making himself invisible. He was looking for a sign, a flicker of the decency and compassion he felt the world had lost. He was looking for someone who valued a human being more than a few dollars. He had been about to give up when he walked into the daily grind. Clara's simple, unhesitating act of kindness had struck him like a bolt of lightning. It was so small, yet so profound. She had nothing, yet she gave. She expected nothing in return. "It was her eyes, David," Arthur explained to his lawyer in his penthouse office, the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation below them. There was no pity in them, just empathy, a recognition of shared humanity. Henderson wanted to humiliate me. She chose to preserve my dignity. David Chen, a man who dealt in facts and figures, was skeptical. "Arthur, it was $4. It might have been a fluke, She might have been having a good day. Or, Arthur countered, his blue eyes sharp, it's who she is at her core. And I intend to find out. I need to know if it's real. My entire legacy depends on it. So David Chen became a silent observer. He conducted a thorough but discreet background check on Clara Evans. He learned about her abandoned nursing studies, the mountain of debt left by her parents' untimely death, and the crushing weight of her sister's medical condition. The file painted a picture of a young woman under immense pressure, a person who had every reason to be bitter, selfish, and desperate. The next phase of the test was David's idea. It was more direct, designed to test her integrity when the stakes were higher. One rainy Friday evening, as Clara was leaving the cafe after her late cleaning shift, exhausted and soaked, David Chen executed the plan. He walked past her, accidentally letting a thick brown leather wallet slip from his coat pocket onto the wet pavement. He continued walking, not breaking his stride, and disappeared around the corner. Clara saw it fall. She stopped, her heart pounding. The wallet was fat, practically bulging. She picked it up. Her hands, cold from the rain, fumbled with the clasp. She opened it. Inside was a driver's license with David Chen's picture, a few credit cards, and a thick wad of cash. She quickly counted it. There was over $2,000. $2,000. The number screamed in her mind. It was a fortune. It was Lily's next round of medication, covered. It was a month's rent. It was a brief, blissful reprieve from the constant, suffocating anxiety. The street was empty. The man was gone. No one would ever know. For a dizzying moment, she considered it. The sheer, overwhelming temptation was a physical force, making her sway on her feet. She thought of Lily's pale face, of the eviction notice she was half expecting any day. But then, she thought of the man's face on the license. He was just a person, like her. He would be panicking right now, canceling his cards, worrying about the lost cash. She thought of the old man in the cafe and the feeling she had after helping him, that small, warm flicker of doing the right thing. Could she trade that feeling for this cold, heavy guilt? Her integrity, battered and tested as it was, won out. Taking a deep breath, she clutched the wallet and ran in the direction the man had gone, her cheap sneakers splashing through the puddles. "Sir! Sir, you dropped this!" she yelled into the rainy darkness. From the shadows of an alleyway, David Chen stepped out, his face an unreadable mask. In the black sedan down the street, Arthur Kensington watched the scene unfold on a small monitor, fed by a hidden camera, his breath held tight in his chest. "You dropped this," Clara gasped, holding out the wallet, her chest heaving from the sprint. Rain plastered her thin jacket to her shoulders. David Chen looked from her face to the wallet in her hand. He took it, his expression cool and professional, but a flicker of genuine surprise registered in his eyes. He opened it, checked the contents, and then looked back at her. "Thank you," he said, his voice even. "I didn't even realize it was gone. You're very honest." "I just hope if it ever happens to me, someone would do the same," Clara replied, a little breathless. David reached inside the wallet and pulled out a $100 bill. "Please take this, for your trouble and your honesty." Clara immediately shook her head, taking a step back. "No, I couldn't. It's okay. I'm just glad you got it back." "I insist," David said, his gaze unwavering. "No, really," Clara said, giving him a small, tired smile. "Just pay it forward sometime. Have a good night." Before he could argue, she turned and hurried away, disappearing into the rainy gloom of Oak Street. David stood there for a long moment, the $100 bill still in his hand. He got back into the sedan where Arthur was waiting. The old man was silent, staring at the empty, rain-slicked street where Clara had stood. A single tear traced a path down his wrinkled cheek. "She refused the reward, Arthur," David said softly, finally breaking the silence. $2,000 in her hand, a life-changing amount for her, and she ran through the rain to return it and refused a $100 reward. He paused, shaking his head slightly. "I'll admit, I didn't think she would." "Kindness can be an impulse, David," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "But integrity is a choice, especially when you have every reason to choose otherwise. She just made her choice." The test was over, but for Clara, a new and more difficult trial was just beginning. The following Monday, She arrived at work to find Mr. Henderson in a particularly foul mood. A regional manager had made a surprise visit and found fault with everything, from a speck of dust on a light fixture to the day's sales figures. Henderson needed a target for his fury, and Clara was it. He accused her of being slow, of giving a friend a free refill, which she hadn't. And then he brought up the incident with the old man 2 weeks prior. "I can't have employees who think with their heart instead of their head," he barked. "This is a business, not a soup kitchen. I'm cutting your hours, effective immediately." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. "Mr. Henderson, please. I need the hours. I can't." "Not my problem," he snapped, turning his back on her. "Maybe you should have thought of that before you started giving away company property." The reduced hours were a devastating blow. It was a firing in slow motion. Her already meager paycheck was slashed in half. The small cushion she had been desperately trying to build for Lily evaporated. The anxiety that had been a coiled serpent in her gut was now a raging dragon, burning through her resolve. Desperation began to set in. She looked for other jobs, but with her limited availability due to her part-time nursing classes and caring for Lily, she found nothing. A week later, Lily had a bad episode. Her breathing became shallow, her lips tinged with blue. Clara had to rush her to the emergency room. The doctors at St. Bridget's Pediatric Center were able to stabilize her, but the cardiologist, Dr. Miller, sat Clara down with a grave expression. "Clara, her condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated," the doctor said gently. "We need to move the surgery up. We can't wait much longer. We need to schedule it for next month." "Next month?" Clara whispered, the words catching in her throat. "But the cost. My insurance won't cover all of it. I don't have the money." "I know it's difficult," Dr. Miller said, her eyes full of sympathy. "The hospital has financial aid programs, but they only go so far. You'll need to come up with a significant deposit to secure the surgical team and the operating room. At least $20,000. $20,000. The number was so impossibly large it seemed like a joke. Clara felt a wave of nausea. She had less than $500 in Lily's jar. She had failed. Her hard work, her sacrifices, they amounted to nothing. She sat in the sterile hospital corridor, the antiseptic smell burning her nostrils, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to cry, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. She had hit rock bottom, a place of utter and complete despair. It was in this state of absolute vulnerability 2 days later that she received a certified letter. The envelope was thick and creamy, bearing the logo of a prestigious law firm, Chen, Whitehall and Associates. Her blood ran cold. Was she being sued? Had Mr. Henderson found some ridiculous reason to press charges? With trembling hands, she tore it open. The letter was brief and formal. It requested her presence at their downtown office on Friday at 10 a.m. for a matter of significant personal and financial importance. It mentioned no details. At the bottom was a name, David Chen. The name hit her like a punch. The man with the wallet. How did he find her? What could he possibly want? Fear, confusion, and a tiny, inexplicable sliver of hope warred within her. With nothing left to lose, she knew she had to go. The address on the letter led Clara to the heart of the financial district, a canyon of gleaming skyscrapers that seemed to pierce the clouds. She felt small and out of place in her best and only blouse, which was slightly frayed at the cuffs. The building housing Chen, Whitehall and Associates, was a monument of glass and steel. Its lobby vast and silent, paved with polished black marble that reflected her worn-out shoes back at her. The receptionist, a woman with immaculate hair and a dismissive air, directed her to the 54th floor. The elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching speed. When the doors opened, Clara stepped into a world she had only ever seen in movies. The offices were a whisper of quiet efficiency and immense wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of the city, a view that seemed to belong to gods, not mortals. A secretary led her down a hallway lined with imposing art to a large corner office. Seated behind a vast mahogany desk was David Chen, the man from the rainy street. He stood as she entered, his expression as neutral as she remembered. "Ms. Evans, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a plush leather chair opposite his desk. "Please, have a seat." Clara sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mr. Chen, I don't understand. How did you find me? Is this about your wallet? In a way, yes, David said, sitting down. My client was very impressed by your honesty that night, and by a previous interaction you had with him. Your client? Clara asked, her confusion deepening. I don't know any of your clients. I think you do, David said. He pressed a button on his intercom. Mr. Kensington, Ms. Evans is here. A door she hadn't noticed opened, and from an adjoining room, a man walked in. He was tall and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his shoes gleamed. But it was his face that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. The wrinkles were the same. The posture, though no longer stooped, was familiar. And the eyes were unmistakable. They were the clear, intelligent blue eyes of the old man from the cafe. Clara stared, speechless. Her mind struggled to connect the frail, penniless man in the tweed coat with the powerful, confident figure standing before her. The man smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Hello, Clara, he said, his voice the same raspy tone she remembered, but now imbued with a rich resonance. It's good to see you again. My name is Arthur Kensington. Clara could only shake her head, trying to process the impossible reality. You were the man at the cafe. I don't understand. Please allow me to explain, Arthur said, taking a seat beside David's desk. He then began to tell her everything. He spoke of his wife, Eleanor, of his disappointment in his grandchildren, and of his search for someone who embodied the values he held dear. He told her about his disguise, a way to see the world not as a billionaire, but as an invisible old man. That day in the cafe, I didn't forget my wallet, Clara, he confessed. It was a test, one of many I had set for myself. You were the first person who didn't dismiss me or pity me or try to take advantage of me. You treated me with dignity. You sacrificed something of your own for a complete stranger. He then told her about the second test with the wallet. David informed me of your circumstances, he said gently. He told me about your sister, Lily. We know the pressure you are under. You had every reason in the world to take that money. It would have been understandable, justifiable even, but you didn't. You chose integrity when it was the hardest choice to make. Clara felt a dizzying mix of emotions, shock, confusion, a strange sense of violation at having been spied on, and a burgeoning, terrifying hope. Why are you telling me this? She finally managed to whisper. This was the moment. Arthur leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto hers. Because, Clara, I have spent the last 6 months in despair, believing my life's work would fall into the hands of people who would dishonor it. You have given me hope. I want to offer you a proposition. I want you to be my heir. The word hung in the air, electric and unbelievable. Heir, Clara laughed, a short, hysterical sound. Heir? To what? I'm a waitress. You're a billionaire. I am an old man who needs to ensure his legacy is one of compassion and integrity, not greed, Arthur said firmly. This isn't about giving you a life of luxury, though you will never have to worry about money again. This is an offer of a position of immense responsibility. I have established a new framework for my estate. The majority of my assets will be placed into a charitable foundation, the Eleanor Kensington Foundation, dedicated to pediatric health and research. I want you to run it. He saw the stunned disbelief on her face and continued, his voice softening. The first act of the foundation, once legally established with you at its head, will be to cover all of Lily's medical expenses. The best surgeons, the best care, whatever it takes. That is my gift to you, regardless of your answer. Lily, the name cut through the fog in her brain. The best care, the surgery, the $20,000 deposit that seemed like $20 million. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her washed over Clara. Tears welled in her eyes. But why me? She stammered. Because you're not a businesswoman or a financier, Clara, Arthur said. You're a healer. You were studying to be a nurse. You care about people. That's the quality I need. I can teach you the business. David can handle the legalities. But I can't teach someone to have a good heart. And that, my dear, is what you have. The room was silent as Clara tried to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. Her life a moment ago was a dead end. Now a door had been flung open to a universe she never knew existed. It was a dream, a fairy tale. But as the initial shock began to subside, a cold knot of dread began to form in her stomach. Fairy tales always have a villain, and a fortune of this size would not be given away without a fight. The days that followed were a surreal blur for Clara. True to his word, Arthur, through David Chen, had the $20,000 deposit wired to St. Bridget's Pediatric Center before Clara even left the office that first day. Lily's surgery was scheduled with the top pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country. When Clara told Lily, the relief and joy on her sister's face was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. A moment of pure, unadulterated happiness that eclipsed all the strangeness of her new reality. Arthur insisted Clara quit her job at the Daily Grind immediately. He had a private car pick her up each morning from her cramped apartment and take her to the Kensington Holdings Tower. She spent her days in a whirlwind of education. She was tutored in finance, philanthropy management, and corporate law. She sat in on board meetings, a silent observer at a long table of powerful men and women who eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Arthur was a patient teacher, guiding her through the complex world he had built. He spoke not just of profits and losses, but of ethics, responsibility, and the philosophy that had guided his success. "Money is a tool, Clara," he would say, looking out over the city from his office. "It can build or it can destroy. The choice lies with the one who wields it." Despite the comfort and security, Clara felt like she was living in a gilded cage. The world of Kensington Holdings was cold and intimidating. The people were polished and transactional. She missed the simple human connections of her old life. She felt like an imposter, a waitress in a queen's robes. The unease she felt soon crystallized into outright fear. Arthur had, until now, kept his decision from his family, but it couldn't remain a secret forever. He called a family meeting in the formal drawing room of his sprawling mansion, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. Clara was there, at Arthur's insistence, standing awkwardly by his side. Marcus and Isabella Kensington arrived, exuding an aura of privilege and impatience. Marcus was in his late 20s, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, his suit costing more than Clara's annual income. Isabella, a few years younger, was flawlessly beautiful and looked as if she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine, her eyes scanning the room with bored detachment. "Grandfather," Marcus said, his tone smooth but with an undercurrent of steel, "you said this was urgent. I have a merger to finalize." "This is more important than any merger, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice grave. He gestured towards Clara. "I'd like you to meet Clara Evans. Marcus, Isabella, this is the young woman I've chosen to be my successor and to lead the Eleanor Kensington Foundation, which will be the primary beneficiary of my estate." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Isabella's bored expression vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. Marcus's smooth facade cracked, his eyes narrowing into venomous slits. "You're what?" Isabella finally sputtered, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're joking. This is a joke, right?" "Is this senility, grandfather?" Marcus sneered, taking a step forward. He looked Clara up and down with utter contempt. "You're handing over our family's legacy, my birthright, to a coffee pourer?" "This legacy is mine to bestow," Arthur stated, his voice ringing with authority, "and I will not see it corrupted by your greed. Clara possesses the one thing this family has lost: character." The dam of civility broke. The next hour was a torrent of rage, threats, and insults. They called Clara a gold digger, a con artist, a parasite who had preyed on a grieving old man. Their words were like acid, stripping away Clara's fragile confidence, making her feel small and dirty. She stood silently, her hands trembling, as the venom of people who had never known a day of struggle was spat at her. "You think we'll let this happen?" Marcus hissed, his face inches from Arthur's. "You think we'll just stand by while you give everything away to this nobody? I will fight you. I will drag her name through the mud. I'll hire every lawyer in this city. I'll prove you're incompetent and that she manipulated you. By the time I'm done, she won't be able to get a job cleaning toilets." He turned his cold fury on Clara. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he whispered, his voice dripping with menace. "Because I'm going to tear your world apart. You and your sick little sister." The mention of Lily was a physical blow. All the color drained from Clara's face. This was no longer about money or a foundation. This was a threat against the only thing in the world that mattered to her. The meeting ended with Marcus and Isabella storming out, slamming the heavy oak doors behind them. Arthur, looking suddenly frail and older than he ever had in his tweed coat, sank into a chair. "I am sorry you had to witness that, my dear," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I knew they would be angry, but I underestimated their cruelty." Clara finally found her voice, a frightened whisper. "He threatened Lily." "They are empty threats," Arthur reassured her, though his own face was clouded with worry. "They have no power over her care." But Clara knew better. People like Marcus and Isabella didn't need legal power to cause harm. They had money, connections, and a complete lack of morality. The fairy tale was over. The wolves were at the door, and they had just shown her their teeth. For the first time, Clara wondered if the price of this inheritance was one she wasn't strong enough to pay. Marcus Kensington was true to his word. The assault began not with lawyers, but with a calculated, vicious media campaign. Within a week, a sleazy tabloid published a front-page story with the headline, "Billionaire's Waitress, Angel of Mercy or Cunning Gold Digger." The article painted Clara as a manipulative opportunist who had sunk her claws into a vulnerable, grieving senior citizen. Anonymous sources close to the family were quoted, describing Clara as having a checkered past and a history of preying on lonely old men. They twisted her story, making her poverty seem like a calculated sob story, and her sister's illness a tool for sympathy. Private investigators hired by Marcus began digging into every corner of her life. They interviewed her estranged relatives, former classmates, and even Mr. Henderson from the Daily Grind, who was all too happy to portray her as a lazy, dishonest employee. The world Clara knew began to crumble. Her phone buzzed with notifications from reporters. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment building, their camera flashes like gunshots in the dark. Her few friends, confused and overwhelmed by the stories, grew distant. She felt isolated, exposed, and deeply ashamed, even though she had done nothing wrong. The public narrative was so powerful, it made her question her own motives. The pressure was immense. The weight of the Kensington name, which was meant to be a shield, now felt like a target on her back. She stopped leaving her apartment unless absolutely necessary. The joy and relief she had felt were replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. Arthur was furious, deploying his own legal and PR teams to fight back, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Mud once slung tends to stick. The true crisis came when Marcus played his most ruthless card. David Chen received a notification of a formal legal challenge to Arthur's competency. Filed by Marcus and Isabella, the petition requested an immediate psychiatric evaluation of Arthur Kensington and a temporary injunction to freeze his assets, citing erratic behavior and susceptibility to undue influence. Their key piece of evidence was his delusional plan to disinherit his own family in favor of a stranger. Simultaneously, a more insidious attack was launched. An anonymous complaint was filed with the State Medical Board against St. Bridget's Pediatric Center, alleging procedural improprieties in the scheduling of high-cost surgeries for uninsured patients, specifically referencing Lily's case. It was a clear, malicious attempt to intimidate the hospital and disrupt Lily's care. While the complaint was baseless, it triggered a mandatory internal review, casting a shadow of uncertainty over Lily's upcoming surgery. When Clara heard the news, something inside her snapped. The fear that had paralyzed her for weeks turned into a cold, hard rage. They had come after her sister. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. That evening, she went to Arthur's mansion. He looked defeated, the legal battle taking a visible toll on his health. He was slumped in his study, a stack of legal documents on the desk before him. "This is my fault, Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. "I have dragged you into this viper's nest. Perhaps the best thing is for you to walk away. I have already established a separate, untouchable trust for Lily's care. Her future is secure. You don't have to endure this. You can be free. Clara looked at the kind old man who had tried to do something good and was now being torn apart by his own kin. She thought of Lily, whose life was being used as a pawn. She thought of the sneer on Marcus's face, and she made a choice. No, she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a newfound strength. No, that's what he wants. He wants me to run. If I run, he wins. He proves I was only ever in it for the money for Lily. He proves you're an old fool who was easily tricked. He gets everything, and the world goes on believing that people like him always win. She took a deep breath, standing taller than she ever had before. They think I'm a weak, stupid waitress. They've underestimated me. They've underestimated you. You taught me that money's a tool. I think it's time we start using it, but not their way. We're going to fight this our way. A spark returned to Arthur's eyes. What do you have in mind? He's fighting a PR war, Clara said, her mind racing. So we'll fight one too, but we won't sling mud. We'll build something. He wants to talk about my past. I want to talk about the future of the Eleanor Kensington Foundation. The plan was audacious. Instead of hiding, Clara decided to step into the spotlight. With Arthur's blessing and David Chen's guidance, she called a press conference. She didn't send a statement. She showed up in person. Standing at a podium facing a sea of cameras and reporters, Clara Evans was terrified. But she wasn't the scared waitress from Oak Street anymore. She was a woman fighting for her family and her principles. She didn't speak of the attacks against her. Instead, she spoke with passion and eloquence about her dream of becoming a nurse. She spoke about Lily's battle, not for sympathy, but to illustrate the struggles of countless families facing catastrophic medical bills. Then she unveiled her vision for the Eleanor Kensington Foundation. She laid out a detailed, brilliant plan, a plan she had spent the last few weeks developing, not just to pay for surgeries, but to fund research, build affordable family housing near hospitals, and create support networks for parents and siblings of sick children. She spoke of Eleanor Kensington, whose own private journals revealed a deep passion for children's welfare. Clara wasn't claiming a fortune. She was embracing a legacy. She ended her speech by looking directly into the cameras. Marcus and Isabella Kensington see their grandfather's fortune as a prize to be won. I see it as a responsibility to be honored. They can have the headlines. I, along with Arthur Kensington, will be busy trying to save children's lives. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get to the hospital to be with my sister. She didn't take any questions. She simply walked away, leaving a room of stunned reporters. The narrative began to shift. The public saw not a gold digger, but a poised, compassionate, and fiercely intelligent young woman with a noble vision. They saw a grieving grandfather trying to honor his wife's memory, and they saw two greedy grandchildren trying to stop it. Marcus's attack had backfired. He had tried to make Clara the villain, but in doing so, he had revealed himself as one. The trial by fire was not over, but Clara Evans had just proven she would not be burned. The morning after the press conference, the world looked different. The snarling tabloid headlines were replaced by thoughtful op-eds in national papers. The heiress with a heart, one read. Kensington's compassionate crusade, declared another. Talk show hosts who had previously dissected Clara's checkered past were now praising her poise and her brilliant, detailed vision for the foundation. On social media, the hashtag #TeamClara began to trend. She hadn't just defended herself, she had presented a future so compelling and benevolent that the public couldn't help but rally behind it. The narrative had been wrestled from Marcus's control, and he was now cast in the role he had written for her, the villain. The true checkmate, however, happened not in the court of public opinion, but in the sterile, soundproof conference room of David Chen's law firm. Marcus and Isabella were summoned, arriving with their own team of belligerent lawyers, still posturing with an arrogance that was beginning to look desperate. "This is a waste of time, Chen," Marcus began, leaning back in his chair. "Our petition for competency is solid. The man is giving away a fortune. No judge will see that as sane." David Chen didn't respond. Instead, he placed a small digital audio recorder on the polished table. "Before we discuss your petition," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "I'd like to play something for you. A conversation between you and a Mr. Peterson, the private investigator you hired. He pressed play. The room filled with Marcus's voice, tinny and sharp, through the small speaker. I don't care if you have to invent it, the recording of Marcus said. I need dirt. Make her look like a tramp, a user. And that hospital? Find a violation, any violation. I want them buried in paperwork. I want that surgery delayed indefinitely. Put the fear of God into them. The color drained from Marcus's face. Isabella, who had been examining her manicure, slowly looked up, her eyes wide with panic. Their lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. David Chen let the recording play to its damning conclusion before switching it off. The silence that followed was suffocating. The penalties for filing a malicious complaint against a medical facility, for conspiring to commit libel, and for attempting to suborn perjury are quite severe, David stated, his words as precise and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. I have here a countersuit ready to file, naming you both. It details a campaign of harassment and defamation. Mr. Peterson has already provided a sworn affidavit and is prepared to testify. You aim for Arthur's competency. We will aim for your freedom. He slid a single document across the table. Or you can sign this. It permanently withdraws your lawsuit and relinquishes all future claims on the Kensington estate, now and forever. You will walk away. You have 5 minutes to decide. Isabella broke first, turning on her brother. You idiot, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You arrogant, stupid idiot. You recorded yourself. You ruined everything. Marcus stared at the document, his bravado finally shattered. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a bully who had been caught. He picked up the pen, his hand trembling with rage and humiliation, and signed his name. Isabella followed suit, her signature a furious scrawl. They left the room without another word, their empire of greed collapsing into dust around them. A week later, the frantic turmoil of the past month faded into the quiet, anxious hum of the hospital waiting room. Lily's surgery was underway. Clara sat on a stiff vinyl chair, twisting a paper cup in her hands. Arthur sat beside her, his presence a silent, steady comfort. For 8 hours they waited. They didn't talk about the foundation or the legal battles. Instead, Arthur spoke of Eleanor. He told Clara how his wife used to volunteer in this very hospital, how she would sit for hours with children whose parents couldn't be there, reading them stories. She always said that the true measure of a society was how it treats its most vulnerable children, Arthur said, his voice soft with memory. She would have loved you, Clara. She would have seen the same fire in you that I do. In that quiet waiting room, Clara finally understood. She wasn't just inheriting Arthur's money. She was being entrusted with Eleanor's spirit. The doors to the waiting area finally swung open. Dr. Miller approached, pulling down her surgical mask. A broad, tired smile lit up her face. The surgery was a complete success, she announced. The repair is strong. She's in recovery. She's going to be fine. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped Clara's lips. It was a sound that came from the depths of her soul, releasing years of fear and worry. She threw her arms around Arthur, and the old billionaire held her tightly as she cried. Not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming, cleansing joy. With the legal storms weathered and Lily's health secured, Clara's new life truly began. She officially assumed her role as president of the Eleanor Kensington Foundation. She moved not into a sprawling mansion, but into a lovely, light-filled 4-bedroom house in a quiet, green suburb. It had a big backyard for Lily to relax in during her recovery and a guest room that Arthur frequented for weekend dinners. It was a home, not a statement. Clara proved to be a force of nature. She poured all her pent-up energy, intelligence, and compassion into her work. Her first-hand experience with the healthcare system's failings gave her a unique and powerful perspective. She wasn't an executive delegating from on high. She was on the ground, touring facilities, speaking with doctors, and sitting with families to understand their needs. She was brilliant, intuitive, and tireless. Arthur Kensington lived for another 3 years, years he later called the most fulfilling of his life. His greatest joy was witnessing the opening of the first Eleanor's house right next to St. Bridget's, a beautiful, welcoming facility providing free, comfortable housing for families with children undergoing long-term treatment. At the opening ceremony, a little girl with leukemia gave him a crayon drawing of a smiling sun. He framed it and kept it on his bedside table until the day he died. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, a content man who knew his legacy, and his wife's, was not only safe, but was flourishing in a way he had never dared to dream. Years later, Clara stood in the walk-in closet of her home. It was filled with the tools of her trade: elegant business suits for fundraising galas, practical blazers for board meetings, and comfortable shoes for walking hospital corridors. But in the very back, hanging in a protective garment bag, was her old, faded waitress apron from the daily grind. It still carried the faint scent of coffee and bleach. Some days before a particularly challenging meeting or a difficult decision, she would open the bag and touch the worn fabric. It was her touchstone, her anchor. It reminded her of the exhausted, frightened girl who was drowning in debt. It reminded her of the profound, simple dignity of an old man in a threadbare coat. And it reminded her that her entire world, and the worlds of countless children her foundation now helped, had been transformed not by a billion-dollar inheritance, but by a choice, a single, compassionate choice to pay for a stranger's $3.75 cup of coffee. Clara's story reminds us that the greatest strength we have is not in our wallets, but in our character. In a world that often feels cold and transactional, her journey from a struggling waitress to a powerful philanthropist began with a small, selfless choice. She proved that kindness is not a weakness, but a superpower. It's a force that can cut through greed, overcome cruelty, and build a legacy far more valuable than money. Her story wasn't a fairy tale about getting rich. It was about discovering her true worth and using it to change the world. We all have the power to be a Clara in someone's life. You never know what battles the people around you are fighting. A small gesture, a kind word, a moment of patience, a helping hand could be the very thing that gives them hope. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We believe stories like this matter, and we're dedicated to bringing you more tales that inspire, uplift, and celebrate the very best of humanity. Thank you for listening.